Welcome everybody to the first of the Gymnastics Australia webinar series. My name is Adi Glancy and I will be the host of today's session, and I'm joined in the webinar by Michelle de Heiden and our presenter Dee Jennings. So the format today, it's a presentation format, slides, images and videos. The video will hopefully play in real time, but that will potentially depend on the bandwidth of your personal computers. There will be opportunities to ask questions at various points, so we will stop at breaks for questions. Alternatively, as the presentation is going on, please send your questions via the chat and we'll collate those and Dee will be able to respond. We are recording the webinar and that will be, you will get access to that at the end post-meeting. It is now time for me to introduce and hand over to our presenter, Dee Jennings. Dee is a master coach in strength and conditioning. She has worked with many of Australia's elite sportsmen and women, including former Australian gymnastics representatives during her time at the VIS and AIS. Dee is currently making an impact in gymnastics as the performance manager at GA's National Centre of Excellence in Melbourne. We're delighted that Dee is able to facilitate your learning and share her knowledge and ideas with you today. I will now hand over the controls to Dee. Please just bear with us a few seconds whilst we do this and enjoy today's webinar.
Okay, looks like we're underway. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks goes especially to Gymnastics Australia for organising this, and I know there's been a mountain of work from Michelle and Adi and Tom trying to get this up and running, being the first of the webinar series. Hopefully it works to plan. It seems like it is. Hi Michelle, how are you going? If there's any technical hitches, please bear with us as it's our first time. Some of the topics that we'll go through today, and I had a quick look through the list of listeners. Some of you may have already heard some of what we're going to present today, but hopefully it's a refresher and you can build on your knowledge and experiences as we go through. So what we're going to start with is why is this area important? Just to start with, why should you incorporate physical preparation programs within your gymnastics program? How to develop movement. Most of you as coaches should know how to develop skills and movement, and developing physical preparation and skill development through movement is really no different to what you do on a day-to-day basis. So you should have confidence that you can actually do this. We'll specifically look at some jump land mechanics and how to do that, and specifically look at some landing mechanics and how we can improve our landings and our takeoffs specifically in some of our programs. We'll touch on some technical or technique-based exercises as well. We'll look at some double leg and single leg examples, and in the next session we'll look at some upper body examples as well. We'll chat about some key principles in strength and conditioning and how to apply those, and then we'll look at how you can practically apply some of the things that we're going through today. I just thought I'd touch on just some research that's out and about at the moment, and this one is a particularly good one which is produced in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. It was in last year's journal, and I'm happy, I've got the paper, so I'm happy to put that on some forum that you guys can also access. So just take a minute just to read through some of these dot points, and I'll highlight just some specific ones as you go through. So there's 2 slides, there's about 6 points, which is really a key summary of the beneficial effects of resistance training in young athletes. I deal with young athletes at the moment. My role as the performance manager at NCE also has a practical element to it, which I've, I guess, put in myself, having seen the need to facilitate some better quality strength and conditioning programs within our younger athletes. Specifically, and you'll see from some of the videos that we go through, our athlete cohort, ones that I'm working now with, aren't the top level athletes, aren't the Georgia Rose Browns of our program, but they're the Chloe Solarises. Now Chloe's a 7, 8, 9-year-old athlete who we can now work on becoming the next Georgia Rose Brown. So we're starting young, but we're starting to look at what we can do with her program to facilitate all of these different things in regard to her physical preparation. So I'll talk in terms of physical preparation rather than strength and conditioning. I think it's a more encompassing term that we can use when we describe our athlete preparation programs. So a couple of key things that I want to highlight. Stronger young athletes will be better prepared to learn complex movements. Now, from what I've seen in gymnastics, most of the movements that you want to do are complex. So they involve upper lower body synchronization, they involve twisting, hinging, pushing, pulling, squatting. So they're quite complex movement. It's not a single movement, it's a sequence of movements to create a routine. It's multifaceted. All of our programs within physical preparation need to be multifaceted. So what that means, and we'll talk about what the foundation capacities are that you should be engaging in and can engage your athletes in. For mine, it's the education and instruction on proper technique. And at any age group, especially our younger athletes, if we can ingrain these movements and processes and patterns into our athletes at a young level with no load, no speed, single leg, single arm, double arm, then we're going to have a much more robust athlete to work with in the future. I'll just give you a chance just to read through these 2 points and just highlight one. So specifically, this is scientifically evidence-based, so it's not just me saying that these things are really good. It's a lot of other people who are much smarter than I am. So I go on evidence-based practice and specifically published data and published information. So this is a really fantastic area of opportunity, I think, for gymnastics all over the country, and you guys being the forefront of our coaches on the ground, taking this information and putting it into your programs is going to be great. You guys have got a lot of competing programs, competing areas that you need to work on. So for me, these are the big rocks in your program. So these are the things that the coaches talk to me all the time about. Floor, vault, bars, beam, and how do we fit that all together with artistry and choreography to make what you need to do to compete day to day. Now, just having those things, we have a lot of discussion, strong, robust discussions about where the time should be spent with the athlete and who gets priority in the coaching team as to does the athlete need to do more floor, do they need to do more vault, should they spend more time on their beam dismounts, or should they spin more around the bars. Now, I've added a couple more into our area as well. So I've put in, they need to be flexible, we need to have athletes that aren't injured, we need to be able to put some recovery in, and we also need some capacity development as well. So lots and lots of competing priorities go into what we're trying to do and get out of our gymnasts. Now, we can't keep filling that little tub full of rocks. Eventually it's going to overflow, and that's where we get injuries. We don't give the athlete enough recovery. We keep adding and adding and adding and adding, trying to develop more things, and we have these competing priorities. So we've got to determine what are the main things that we're going to focus on. And if we spend, for mine, time now developing these physical capacities, we get more robust athletes who can spend longer training, and you guys will get better outcomes out of your apparatus. So just to drill down a little bit on the physical capacity side of it, for me the physical capacity, in regardless of any sport that you work with, hinge around strength power. Now, for mine, the changes in gymnastics, I worked in gymnastics a number of years ago within the old VIS HPC program. I was their strength and conditioning coach, and the skill development and the type of skills that are now being employed by our high-level gymnasts require a much greater degree of strength and a much greater expression of that strength into something powerful, dynamic and explosive. So if we don't look at now how we can build this into our programs and how we can develop these capacities, then we're behind the 8 ball already. So not only is strength power a real key and priority, everything in these Olympic rings feed into the ability to create strength and power. We need to be able to move well to express our strength and power movements. We need balance and flexibility to perform the skills that you need to do within all of the routines and apparatus. We need to have muscular endurance, not so much to ride a bike fast and for a long time, but to get through a full routine and to get through 4 apparatus day after day. And we need to be fast and agile to cope with landings that are slightly off balance or to promote power in a vault. So we need to actually be able to run fast. So there's 2 specific aims of any strength and conditioning or physical performance program that we should have. We need to actually improve performance. We wouldn't be doing it unless we wanted to improve performance. And also we want to reduce injury. Now, I hear a lot in gymnastics that there's a massive high injury rate. Now, we have the capacity to change that and to alleviate some of the stress on our little gymnast's body just by doing some basics really well, and we'll talk through some of those things that you can do and put into your program. So how do we get our young gymnast all the way through to be the Maddie Ladens of the world without being injured, without losing training time, with being the best they can be and enhancing their physical performance? You would have seen this sort of example but flipped up the other way in terms of specific and non-specific. Usually we want our elite athletes to be the top of the tree in regard to where they are, the specificity that they're doing, and that sort of triangle that we often see in a lot of coaching manuals. This is a really good one in terms of an exercise continuum. And we talk about general to specific or building capacity before we get too specific in regard to exercise prescription. So our novice down the bottom here doesn't have to be as specific as our elite athlete right at the top of the tree or the top of the pyramid here. So the exercises that we select down the bottom can be really anything. And I say anything in regard to how you're looking at and what your aims of your program are. So if that's injury prevention, then it might be as easy as balancing on one leg with your eyes closed. And we'll see some examples of the exercises that we've put together for some of the NCE athletes. As we move further up and our athletes become trained and advanced and more elite, then we can get more specific. But unless we do the groundwork down through here, then it limits what we can actually do and facilitate exercise development-wise at the top of our tree, because we're still looking at changing body shapes, we're still looking at minimising injury, we still need to do injury prevention programs for something that we could have addressed down the bottom of the chain. So just another example of how an exercise continuum might look or work. We have a lot of physio-based exercises or activation sequence exercises, single leg range of motion exercises on the left-hand side. And then we move to our athletic development. So this is where our elite athletes need to be and need to stay. So we're looking at specifically performance enhancement. So complex exercise, which are dynamic, fast and loaded. If we don't do this work first, then we're going to be much more prone to injury when we start loading that athlete with a lot of different variables. So unless we can do something, for example, like a single leg squat, and we'll look at that example later in the presentation, if we can't do that well, then if we try and do it fast, or we try and load that movement, or we try and make that movement more explosive, then we're going to get into poor motor patterning, poor pathways. We're going to lead to things like muscle imbalances with other muscles doing the job that we should have trained back down when the athlete was a young 5, 6, 7-year-old. So the goals of our physical preparation or physical development program are precise technique. So that's the paramount, and you guys are so good at looking at technique in all of your other exercises, but seem to, at different stages, let the strength and conditioning programs sort of leave by the wayside. So we need to ingrain the technique in each of our athletes in each of their exercises. So whether it's a bodyweight squat or whether it's I'm trying to think of some examples that I see each day that the coaches do in their conditioning program. Adi, you might be Michelle, you might be able to help me.
Or front somersault
landings or
handstands, B-snaps.
Yep, B-snaps, handstands, all of those things. Okay, unless we have really precise technique in those sort of things, then again we're letting our athletes down in terms of their actual development. So how can we progress something that's not perfect? If it's perfect, then we want to embed that into the muscle memory of the athlete. So then when we come to load it, we come to do it faster, we come to do a single leg version, they've got a history that they can call on in how to actually perform that movement. And then we want that movement to be able to withstand the effects of speed and fatigue. So is that movement robust? Can they do 10 or 15 single leg squats perfectly? Can they withstand the fatigue when they come to the 12th and 13th to stop your knee deviating from that neutral position of over your second toe? So what movements are we actually talking about? So we want to be able to push, we want to be able to hinge, we want to be able to pull, and we want to be able to twist. We also need to be able to land and absorb, and also have the strength to take off and absorb. Okay, so they're our key movements. But we need to do these in every direction. We need to be able to do them in every plane, so horizontal, sagittal, all of those different things, frontal. We need to do them at different heights. We need to do them at different speeds as well. So every complexity. So that's our variation when we talk about program design. So you can do the same exercise, but change the direction that they do. You can do a different plane. You can look at how high they might jump. You can look at the speed of the jump, or whether you do a jump to a box, or whether you practice some plyometrics. And you can add in any of these things to aid the variety of your program. So our athletes must be able to squat, lunge, push, pull, rotate and hinge. And we need to be able to do all of that correctly and in control. So by in control, I mean they're not off balance, they're not off alignment, they can do it perfectly each time, every time, and it's a robust movement that we've practiced and planned. So just some general principles for us to work with. What we want to avoid is loading a poor movement. Okay, we've spoken about just some program variables, so speed, volume, or resistance, or we can call that load. So can the athlete do it with their own body weight? Can they then load with an external resistance? And that might be things like TheraBand or medicine ball, or we've even started using, and it doesn't weigh anything at all, the foam out of a pit. So an easy example of that is just changing the movement pattern. So we've done a single leg balance exercise. They've done it with their eyes closed. You'll see some examples through the videos that we played. And then we've added some leg swings in our second program to add a little bit of variety and challenge the system of balance. And then we've got them in pairs, and throwing and catching with gymnasts is quite entertaining for me as a coach, especially with 6-7-year-olds. You want to try and create exercises that still fulfill the aim of the actual program. So for ours, it's single leg control, hip stability and balance, but add in an element of fun. So it's very, very simple. We're just going in pairs. We grab a cube of foam, they throw it and catch it. They go on the side and throw it and catch it, and then they go overhead and they throw it and catch it. So adding a few little key variables in there. We didn't get to that stage without doing some preparation work, and what we tried to do is eradicate the movement errors first. So we're looking specifically for a couple of different things: hip stability, hip square, knee over toe, soft knee to engage your glutes, really key things that the athlete can really get set in any exercise that they do, single or double leg. Excuse me. So this is where we are at the moment. So as I said, I've started working with our what we call group 5 and 6, and I've also started with our groups 3 and 4, which underpin our elite program. So we're teaching them how to do these exercises. So how to squat, how to lunge, so a double leg and a single leg exercise. And if we take a lower body example, then we can translate it into some really basic actions. Can the athlete land properly with good alignment? Can they hop? Excuse me, and can they jump? Once they can do all of these things, then we can add some sport-specific movements in. But until we've got these fundamental movements and we've got these basic actions, we shouldn't touch our sport specificity. Excuse me. So here's an example that I've put together. This is a running skills and drills example. So if we go on our principle of what we've just looked at, and looking at the foundation movements and the movements required to get all the way up to the top, where, excuse me, I've got a tickle, where These are really complex movements. So we want to practice, for example, starts and maximal velocity sprints and some really heavy agility exercises and movements. So we need all of these things down the bottom before we can actually go through, become a little bit more sport specific and be really specific with our competition areas. So things like push-ups. Can your athletes actually do a proper push-up? And I say proper push-up, and that's without a dish shape through their upper back. Looking at where your scapula sit and do they stay set when you actually do your push-up movement. Push-ups for me have elbows externally rotators, and you want to come down fully so that your nose touches the floor, chest touches the floor. And that's a learning pattern. Excuse me. That's a learned pattern that the coaches teach. So from a dish position to a nice open chest position. So can we do that? And then we have the ability to make it, as we go up the chain, a little bit more sport specific. Let's build the capacity first and become more specific as the athlete goes through the program. So let's look at a couple of other exercises here. I'm going to cough again in a minute. Walking lunges, we'll look at some jumping activities. Can they do a good single leg squat? Can we run forward and backwards? Can we squat and reach? Horizontal stability. Can your athletes skip properly? Because skipping has a really strong correlation with running and running technique. So unless your athletes can skip, which requires good single leg squat, so good hip mechanics, good pushing and explosiveness to skip and skip high, then when it comes to running fast, we can't single leg stance. So if we go up to these exercises here and we can't skip properly, our knees bent, we've got a closed hip, no control through our upper and lower body, then regardless of our teaching points up here, we don't have the mechanics down in the first exercise to complete these well. Okay, we might just switch to a video now. So the video coming up.
Expand. Go up. Yeah. Alright. Can you share?
So the video that you'll see coming up is now a video of our group 5 and 6. Play. So lost at the moment. Okay, oh, it's going. It's going. We're on. So the video you can see now is a video of the exercises that we're completing in our group, excuse me, 5 and 6 of our program. We're starting just with some really easy balance and movement exercises. So can your athlete do a really simple bodyweight squat? And this was really interesting to me. Thanks. About the different ways that these athletes do these exercises. And you'll see lots of different versions of even something as simple as a bodyweight squat. So some real key teaching points, hips and ankles or hips and knees moving together. So once they've got that movement, then we can add a jump land sequence. Excuse me. So how do they promote force or take off, and how do they absorb force and land properly? We spent a lot of time, this is probably the second or third program that we've been through in regard to trying to teach the athletes some good mechanics. Again, you'll see a lot of versions. This was taken last week. Excuse me, of how these exercises are being done. Okay, double leg to single leg movements as well. And again, just watch the knee position in some of these exercises, especially when they land. See what happens to the opposite shoulder as well. So we're not only looking at what happens to the hips, we're looking at what happens with the shoulder. So it's a real action-reaction kind of focus. We do some lateral hops and stick and lands. So these guys, for mine, it's important to control their landing. So the key teaching point here is to stick and hold. They're in a rush all the time, this level of athlete, and they want to just get through it. How many, how often, how much? Okay, we need to just slow them down and be really, really diligent with what they're doing in each of the exercises. Excuse me. Can they do single leg squats, and how do we facilitate the movement pattern that we want? So you'll see just by holding an athlete's hand, you can actually just get them moving in the plane and with the correct technique that you're actually wanting. They can also hold onto a wall, they can hold onto a wall bar, they can use a pole. So that's just some exercises that are really easy to facilitate. Most of those can be done in a warm-up as well. We put them at the end of one of the sessions. We do that twice a week. My preference would be to do it 3 times if I can get the athletes for 3 times a week. That's pushing it with our coaches, but I'll take the program that we've got. We did that twice a week, and it takes about 40 minutes to get through. We might pause there just for some questions. So if you're typing in, or I think Adie's going to unmute your mics.
Or you should be able to unmute your mics if you have a question that you'd like to ask.
Okay. We're going to also have another opportunity to ask questions as we go through. And if you need to save your questions up, make a note of them, and we can always answer them at the end of the presentation as well. Okay, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on jump land mechanics. This for me is a real area that we can become a little less specific in until the athletes get a little bit older. Now that might seem a little bit controversial in terms of a point to touch on and a point to bring up. But again, if you think about developing capacity, here. There we go. Sorry about that. We're back on. So as I was sort of saying, in regard to our jump land mechanics, what we want to try and provide is a library of exercises that the athlete can draw upon. And there's lots of different ways to do things. So for mine, this is a typical landing strategy, which is feet together, a tucked under, glute position, and a knee dominant strategy. And what I mean by knee dominant is that the knees and the hips aren't moving together. Okay, it's a stiff impact with an upright torso. Okay, so the shoulders don't come forward at all from the hips. So if you remember back to some of the exercises that we had in the video and what the teaching points were and how you normally jump. So you can't actually jump with any force or land and absorb with any force from this sort of position. So teaching your athletes how to land properly, how to jump properly is a fundamental movement that they should be able to do. As the athlete moves up and becomes a more senior athlete, then we can start teaching them different strategies. But initially we want to be able to give them a library and a battery of exercises and movements that they can draw on. So this might be what you need in competition, but in day-to-day training, 6 months out from competition, then we might change this strategy to alleviate some of the load that's going down the spine and in through the athlete's lower back, that's going forward in that patella tendon, and increase the amount of hip flexion as well. Then as we get towards competition, we might use a different landing strategy as well as they become more specific in what they need to be able to do. So if we look at this posture here, it's very different. So what we want to look at is where the shoulders are in relation to the hips, where the hips are in relation to the knee, and also the angle of the tibia or the shin. So we actually want to utilise the big muscles at the back, our glutes, okay, to absorb a fair bit of this force. And also if we're looking at jumping, so this should be a jumping or a landing. So if I didn't know, I might think that she's actually taking off rather than landing on the mat there. Okay, so this is a good triple flexion or a triple extension position that you might be driving into or out of. What I mean by triple flexion is flexion at the ankles and at the knees and at the hips. And that's how we develop and promote force, and also how we absorb force as well. So I'll just spend a minute or two just looking through the text boxes on this picture, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what we want to try and see from a frontal perspective as well. So for me, from my perspective, and this is again from a physical preparation coach's perspective, then I want to land with my feet hip width apart, my toes, knees and hips and shoulders close to in line. Okay, so as we can see from the next slide, what we're looking at is knees over toes, nice and stable through your hips, stable through your shoulders, and a good trunk angle. Okay, these knees, we want to make sure that they stay apart and they don't knock together, and that's a common thing with younger athletes that you'll see, especially when they jump from a box to the floor or when they're doing multiple jumps. So they might be fine for the first one, but their knees will start to cave at any point. And for me, this is the key thing. Is the athlete able to stabilise across multiple reps? So 1, they might look okay. 2, they might look fairly decent. 6, 7, 8, and then we start seeing this movement deteriorate. So that comes into then, can they reproduce this force when they're tired, at the end of a routine if they're landing off a floor or a beam or a set of bars. So when we talk about squat mechanics, then we all used to be able to do all of these things. So this for me is a perfect squatting position. So feet shoulder width apart, knees tracking over but not beyond toes. So for mine it's about the midfoot, so you can see the line of the knee coming down to the mid of the foot. We have a crease of our hips below parallel. Okay, so this little tacker's in a really, really good solid squat position, and we can load that. This guy, he's got a really sound technique, so he'll be able to pick up whatever that little jar on the floor is, no problem at all, and still maintain this shape. So I challenge you, when we finish doing this presentation, see if you can get into the same position. See if your athletes can get into this same position. Can they actually sit in this position, holding a strong lumbar spine position, with their weight on their heels, with the heels down on the ground, with your feet shoulder width, knees tracking over your toe, an upright torso, and a head looking forward. Okay, can they actually do it? And if they can't, why can't you? Why can't you, firstly, and why can't your athletes? There's no reason other than imbalances, physical limitations, flexibility and range issues, or past history of injury that we can't get our athletes back into this shape. Okay, and if we get our athletes into this shape, it's a mechanically advantageous shape to be in. Okay, we wouldn't be able to do it unless it was meant for us. So, you know, I've worked with a lot of different sports and they talk about, well, how low should we squat and what should we be able to do? So for mine, if you can get into a parallel squat position, then that's probably enough for most sports. If you think about how deep some of your landings need to be, then we might look at, okay, well, we need to go into a deeper squat position just to be safe and stable. If you're a rower, you need to be able to go into a really, really deep squat position. If you're a weightlifter, then this is the bottom of your weightlifting position, so you actually need to have that range. Here's something I've just prepared earlier on an athlete that we've been working with that has some really good changes in her jump land mechanics. You might have seen Chloe in the video before, and we've been working with Chloe on trying to get and promote and develop a little bit more force in her double leg jump. So I'll just, play, go back one, and play this for you. So you can see we've got some really good actions going on. So she's extending all the way into her jump. Hips are nice and open, full extension through her ankles, knees are locked out, and she's actually as high as she can when she jumps. When she lands, let's see if we can pause it on a landing, not too bad. Just notice that right heel's coming up just a little bit. Okay, we really only see that when we slow it down and we're pretty picky. So that's something that we might address in some of her future programs. But have a look at this position here in relation to the previous slide, and we're talking about how to land. So she's landing and absorbing really nicely through that position. So this is where we want to try and get all of our younger athletes to. Okay, I might just play that again so you can have another look. Really simple exercise. Okay, you can do this tomorrow with some of your athletes, and it's a really good way of just working on, can they jump, can they land? Okay, and some of the other exercises that you can do, you can separate our jumping and landing. So we can jump to a box or we can land from a box. And it might sound funny, but landing and jumping is quite a complex movement for our athletes to do. So by adding speed and load and height, let's just see if they can actually do the movement first. Then we can become a little bit more advanced and we can do single leg versions. Now this is a really good example. Yasmin from Wace doing a balance single leg squat exercise. Okay, this is part of the physical testing battery in the national program. Okay, a couple of things here. If we got Chloe, our young athlete, to do this exercise, okay, Yasmin's standing up on a beam there. She's got some boxes that she needs to come down to. If she wasn't able to do a double leg version of this exercise, pretty sure she's not going to be able to do a single leg version either. So let's start with our double leg mechanics, get those really sound and perfect, and work on our single leg mechanics as we go through. There's no need, if we're doing a single leg squat, for Chloe to be on a beam. Okay, that's way too specific for where she's at. Too many things to focus on and concentrate on. She just needs to stand on the floor and do this and not worry about falling off a high beam when she's doing it. We can still use something behind her, and that's really good feedback for any athlete in regard to the depth that they need to be able to do, and it also engages that hip hinge and hip mechanics to work well. So it might be a simple teaching point as to sitting back on a chair, which is one that I use all the time. I find myself using it in every teaching physical preparation session that I have. Sit back, knee over toe, sit back like you're sitting on a chair. And that's just a really easy reference point for your athletes to work towards. So again, what we're looking at is improving our single leg squat ability, and our single leg squat, single leg stance translates into all sorts of different activities. So it helps with our ankle, knee and hip injuries. It helps with our ability to stop, certainly our ability to land. We also, if we've got good single leg mechanics, we can improve our jumping ability. For gymnastics, that means leaping. Okay, we can leap higher and we can land single leg. And we can look at then how that affects our running mechanics as well. Okay, we'll just switch to our next video. Okay, is that playing? Okay, so this is the next group of athletes that we've started to work with. This is our group 3 and 4 athletes, which is, as the first slide said, it's our IL 7s to 10s. So this is a playthrough. It's about a 3-minute clip. So we'll just talk through some of the exercises that we're looking at. So we've tried to capture a little bit more upper body stability exercises, and this is probably the 4th program that we've been through with this group of girls. So we've done a lot of work on just some fundamental movements. So how do the shoulder blades work? How do your hips work? How does your lumbar spine work? Can you balance on one leg? So similar to the exercises that you saw in the first clips, this is the next progression, probably 4 or 5 progressions down the track of some of the exercises that you saw. So we've moved from a single leg version to a single leg, single arm version of the 4-point kneel. This exercise promotes some really good glute stability and glute strength. Okay, you'll see Lisa Bradley in the background there, and she's from an artistic perspective looking at, okay, well, this is might be the start of a leap series. So we want hips to be square, we want hips to be open right at the top. Okay, we need good range and good flexibility, but it's range under control and under the body weight. We talked a little bit about push-ups. So different versions and variations. Okay, so the athlete may not be able to do a full push-up from their feet just yet, so we can add in things like a shoulder touch to stimulate or challenge the athlete in their stability. So you'll see that one side is much better than the other side. Okay, the right hand there is much quicker. Then we can add load. So once they can do a push-up, let's challenge the system again. It doesn't have to be heavy. So we can still do this exercise in a full push-up position. We can do our shoulder touches, or we can add just a light weight. I think Macy's using 2 or 5 kilos there in each hand. Still want to maintain good postures through our upper back. Okay, can the athlete lunge? Can they squat? Can they push? Can they pull? Still have a little bit of work to do on some of their lunge mechanics. We've only just really scratched the surface with this group. There's lots of things that, I'd like to try and change, but again, we've got them for twice a week for about 45 minutes. Once they can demonstrate competency in the exercise, then we can start adding load. So Miranda's got 5 kilos in each hand here, and we can actually build a little bit of strength around the movement. So again, once you've got the movement technique, then we start adding load. It doesn't need to be a whole heap of load to challenge the system. But we want to make sure we're doing double leg, double arm. You'll see a lot of dumbbells being used as well, rather than bars and machines, just to promote some single arm variations and single arm stability. We can sit down, we can stand up, we can do single arm shoulder press, double arm exercises. Okay, well, again, what we're challenging is the athlete's ability to hold position and hold form. Once we have a bodyweight squat that's really competent, again, we can start adding load. So dumbbells to a squatting movement, instead of having a load or a bar behind the shoulders. You can do this with a medicine ball. You can do this with holding 2 plates or dumbbells. Again, we're also looking at what happens with the lower body when the upper body is exercising. So a really simple single arm dumbbell row version, but we don't have a lot of load in our gym, so we can challenge the actual activity by putting the athlete in a balanced position and a balanced scenario. We're teaching the athletes how to squat properly, and that's been a key focus of the program. So how can we challenge them? Okay, Macy's just using a broomstick above her head, but by putting the load above her head and challenging her thoracic, it makes the exercise more complex. So once she has this movement, then we can start looking at, okay, well, how can we add a little bit more load? So we've just got a weighted bar that Ellie's using in this exercise and activity. Same principles that we were developing with our Chloe Solarises of the world in our younger group, knees over toes, good spine position, chest upright, but we're now actually just changing where the load is and making it more challenging because we're incorporating a thoracic position. And then we can move on to some more stability-based exercises. But again, it's the key points of holding shape, holding form, and really sound technique. With this group, it's been about not rushing the exercise, not just getting through the program, but actually good quality movements. So again, once we have good quality in that walkout, we can add and change different things. So in this one for mine, that upper back position needs to be much flatter. Okay, she's getting, for me, in too much of a gymnastics specific position rather than improving her physical performance around her upper body stability. This exercise here is one that the physios really like, that we're working with, because we get a little bit more extension over the ball. Okay, we get an eccentric stretch through the oblique muscles, and then we can add a little bit of tension and load when we come up, and a dynamic twist that the athlete needs to go through to fulfill the exercise requirements. Okay, a side hold, just a really easy, simple exercise. Okay, her alignment's out a little bit there, hips should come forward, shoulders should go back, but it's not too bad. And then we can start mucking around with actually what they do. So the variety comes in challenging the system. Okay, we don't have to change too much of the exercise to make it more difficult. So within the same exercise, I can think of 3, 4, 5, 6 different exercises that can come out and create the variety within the program. Okay, we might pause again there just if there are any questions to go through, just as a result of the couple of different slides that we've touched on.
I've got a question for you, Dee.
Question from the floor.
Yeah, question from the floor. One of the key questions from the coaches will be, well, that's all well and good, you've shown us those exercises. How do I actually put that into my training program?
A lot of these exercises can be incorporated, I think, into the warm-up. So if you haven't got a specific area within your program, then utilise the warm-up to do that. The second part of what I would probably say is make time.
Yeah.
This is a fundamental part of your program, and the physical development that you spend now is only going to incorporate and help your athletes later on. So if you can find 15 minutes every session or half an hour twice a week with your athletes, then the benefit that you're going to get from here is going to be immense. It may not be 6 months, might be 12 months down the track, where your athletes are less likely to be injured, but more likely to improve in regard to their training tolerance and the training load that they'll go through.
Yeah. All right, one more question from me. You've shown us a program that the girls have been doing at the end of a training session. How does that correlate to what they did in strength that particular day?
Yep, we spend a lot of time talking to the coaches, well I do, about what does your training look like for that day. We try to take out as many of the exercises that are doubling up in regard to what they do in their specific strength versus what they do in their strength and conditioning or physical prep program, so that we're not doing the same exercises over and over and over again. We work in conjunction and try and integrate as much as possible. So there's a lot of discussion and dialogue about what I do and what the coaches are doing.
Good. Adi, do we have some other questions there from somebody else?
Yep. One of the questions is, how long does the session you take that you showed on the video take to complete? And how long should you spend every session, warm up, warm down, on this area, minimum kind of optimal?
Yep. I'd take the whole session if I could.
That's not possible.
Which is possibly not possible when we look at what else the girls need to complete. But the session that we've been through on the videos, the group 3 and 4 session, which is the second video that we took, that takes around half an hour, 45 minutes tops to get through. It's done at the end of their session, which optimally for mine isn't that great, but I'll go with what I can get at this stage before I can influence the coaches a little bit more.
Yep.
If you've got half an hour, then you can get a whole heap of different things done. I think you need to be clear about what you're aiming to get done and use that time to fulfill the aim. And the aim needs to change throughout the year. So what you start with shouldn't be what you're doing even a month, 2 months later. So, excuse me, the second part of the question about warm-ups and cool-downs, you can put in your jump land program can take 5 minutes and you can cover 3 exercises in that 5 minutes for a group of between 10 and 12 girls. You can do a single leg balance 3 times by a minute. You can do some jump land technique in front of the mirror and using the mirror as your feedback, and you could probably do just some really basic double leg or single leg squats, and that's all it needs to be as a starter. And then you can build on those type of exercises not only in your warm up, but also in your cool down.
Okay, Dee, Gabriella's asked, do you have any recommendations with sets, reps, loads to start with?
Yep.
And do you do all of the exercises in every session?
We try to. At the moment, our athletes are novices in regard to their physical preparation program, so there's no need to provide a super huge amount of variety. We'll probably touch on the sets and reps question in the session 2, I think, would be a good topic. What was the other part?
Do you do all of the exercises in every session? She also asked, do these replace gym-specific strength programs, rope, chin-up, pullovers, chin-up to dish, etc.?
Yep. Early in the year they will, yes. Again, as we become more specific, then we can start building on the gym-specific strength. But I think you need to understand that we need to develop the capacity of the gymnast. So all of those exercises are very specific to the gym strength program. We can keep doing those and we'll get better at those for a certain period, and then we'll stagnate. We need to develop the underlying capacity of strength, upper body exercises and upper body strength to be able to get better at a rope climb or some of the other exercises. If you just do rope climb, we're going to get better at rope climb, but there's a quicker and easier way, which is building the capacity underlying and underpinning that athlete.
We got more questions, Adi?
No more questions on here. Are there any more questions? Anybody like to talk through a question? Unmute their mic. Okay, we'll continue.
Okay, we're back on. Just touch on, we've got about 5 or 6 minutes to go, but I just wanted to touch on just some training fundamentals. So just some key areas that I think are really relevant and important to developing a program. It's really easy to look at, okay, well, I'm going to individualise my program, but in a practical sense, in a practical sense, a lot of that may not be possible. Okay, what you can do is look at matching your training program to your individual athletes. Okay, so we started with one program for our younger athletes, and I individualise as I go. So if an athlete can't do one of the exercises, then think creatively about how you can individualise that exercise for that athlete. So you don't have to write 10 different programs for your 7-year-old athletes or 10-year-old athletes. You can individualise how they do one specific exercise. So you would have seen 6 different or 5 different versions of a push-up. So some of the girls are doing it on their knees. Some of the girls are doing it with shoulder touch because they can't do a full push-up. Macy can do a full push-up, so we added a little bit of variation with a dumbbell row. So within one program, we can come up with lots of different themes of that program. So that's where the individualisation can come in. When we look at variety, then our key thing is to disrupt homeostasis, or the balance of a system. So again, the variety comes into how often you change your program, how many or different exercises and how much variety you provide. At the elite level, we need to provide more variety. At the beginner level, we provide less variety. So I think there was a question about, how many times a week do you do this, and do you do the same exercises? Yeah, we do the same exercises. We do it twice a week, and they would probably do a 4 or 5 week block of that program. What I'm aiming for is they are competent in the movements that they can do, and they don't move on or they don't progress unless they earn the right to progress. So there's no real point in progressing someone's bodyweight squat. I might think of a different variation of what that exercise might entail to get a better outcome, but I'm not going to change that exercise because that's a fundamental pattern. So I've got to be creative and provide variety in, okay, well, how can I get this athlete to do that exercise better, but I might not change the essence of that actual activity. Progressive overload. Okay, we all want to improve, we all want to look at how do we change the volume, intensity, duration and frequency, and we'll probably touch on that, I think, a little bit more extensively in webinar 2. But I just wanted to look at this in regard to when and how do you progress your athletes. So the exercises that you've been shown on the 2 examples of the video clips, that's a culmination of 4, 5, 6 different programs. Okay, so they don't just jump into that and be able to do it. The progression and the overload comes from being able to adapt and change your programs from what they can do, keeping what they need to develop, and then enhancing what they have actually mastered. So that's where the overload comes in. So an overload might simply be changing the height of a box that they're jumping up to, okay, because you're changing the intensity that the athlete has to actually do it. Or we might add a 3rd session in if I'm so lucky and I can convince our coaches that that's a great idea. So I might change the frequency of what they're doing from 2 sessions to 3 sessions, and that's overload because we're adding something. We're also taking something out though, because we're not filling our rock jar with too many things. Okay, so if I'm adding something in, I've got to think about, okay, well, what does that compromise and how do we manipulate everything else within that program? For mine, it's about this theme. So function before force, speed or volume. So can your athlete do the movement required before we add in anything else? So can they do the things that we've spoken about? Can they jump, land, hinge, push, pull and squat well? So what's the solution? We need to get them mechanically efficient. So we talk about movement. Okay, we need to get these movements really consistent, and we need to get our consistent movements to be even more resilient so that the effects of fatigue, loss of balance, all of those different things don't impact on our movement efficiency, especially in our young athletes. So we're making them more robust to the challenges that you guys need to be able to do. And we always put our physical development one step ahead of our skill development. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next session. So are these hard to coach? No, I have every confidence in you guys as coaches. You've reached a level now that you should be able to coach sport-specific movement. So if you can do sport-specific movement, then you can coach any type of movement. So anything that you've seen today, you should be able to implement right now. And it's not hard to change what you're doing and become more functional and more movement oriented. So here's some real tips that you can utilise as well. So let's go from static to dynamic exercises. So our static exercise might be a front hold. Okay, how do we make that more dynamic? We make it into a push-up, or we make it into a push-up with a row. How do we go from slow to fast? Can we do a bodyweight squat? And then can we make that fast? Can we jump? Okay, we go from small to big in terms of amplitude. We do a jump on the floor, and then we might do a jump onto a box, or we do a jump off a box, so the amplitude or the height improves. Let's go from simple to complex, and don't be too fast in going from one to the other. Let's master the simple and do it really, really well before we move to a complex version of what we're doing. Let's start with unloaded exercise, especially for you younger athletes. Okay, we looked at some research right at the start, but let's be more considered on what we're dealing with in terms of our younger bodies. Okay, let's unload them. Let's make our exercises really simple. Let's start with small blocks, and then we can start loading once we get solid foundations. That's all the slides that we've got for today. I think we're running on time. We might have the chance just for one or two more questions before we finish up. Okay, thanks very much for listening today. I think the organisers would appreciate some feedback on this pilot first webinar, and if you've got any feedback for the presenter, she's more than welcoming of any feedback also. There's an audio recording that will be sent via an email link, so you can access this online. And I'd like to thank you all for tuning in and listening to the first Gymnastics Australia webinar.
And Gymnastics Australia would also like to thank Dee for the wonderful, insightful presentation today, and thank you all for joining us on our first webinar and first of the series. So thank you, and I'm sure we'll have many of you back for the second webinar in a couple of weeks. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.